Okay, so cursed spirits. To some people, they're monsters that need to be wiped out. To others, they're basically just Pokemon. And to others, they're girlfriend material. By the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, we probably saw hundreds of individual cursed spirits, and today we're ranking the top 10. These 10 curses were chosen based on the factors you can see on screen, which includes things like destructive potential, viciousness, and a lot more. As you might expect, the highest ranked curses excel at nearly everything here, whereas the lower ranked curses might do well in like one specific area. A great example of this is Tengen, who's the cursed spirit ranked in 10th place. Unlike everyone else in this video, Tengen has no physical strength and no desire to kill, but she is the best when it comes to advanced techniques. If you've seen season 2 of JJK, then you know Tengen began her life as a human and has been alive since at least the Nara period. This makes her older than Sukuna, likely by a couple hundred years, and during her life, she learned almost everything there is to know about barriers. When people talk about barriers, they're usually referring to a curtain or a domain expansion. However, in Tengen's case, she's created barriers that literally no one else can make. For instance, in chapter 220, we found out that Tengen constructed the largest barriers in history, known as pure barriers. These pure barriers are spread across the whole of Japan, with the bigger ones covering entire groups of mountains. To put this in perspective, Sukuna's massive domain in Shibuya, that was less than 1% the size of a single pure barrier. Now, you might be wondering, what do these pure barriers actually do? And the answer is a lot. For a start, Kenjaku said that they improve the curtains of sorcerers like Ijichi, allowing the Jujutsu world to function the way it does. More importantly though, he said that the pure barriers suppress cursed spirits, which honestly might help to explain why there are so few intelligent curses. Don't forget that nearly 30 years ago, Gojo's birth directly caused curses to get stronger, so it's weird that all these decades later, there's still just a tiny handful of smart curses. A reasonable explanation is that Tengen's cursed spirit suppression reduces the number and the quality of spirits in Japan. Kenjaku himself implied this was the case when he said that if the pure barriers were to disappear, then it would undo 1,000 years worth of progress in the fight against curses. To me, this statement confirms that over time the pure barriers have become more effective, hence why Tengen wasn't willing to destroy them, even though destroying them would have stopped all of Kenjaku's plans. As a side note, thanks to Yuki Tsukumo, we know that these barriers are why Japan has more sorcerers than anywhere else, proving that Tengen's impact is bigger than any other curse. As a result, I pretty much had to include her on this list, but before we move on, I wanted to briefly explain how she became a curse in the first place. Back in 2006, Tengen was still a human and was supposed to merge with Riko Amanai in a ritual that would have kept her as a human for at least 500 more years. However, when the merger failed to happen, Tengen's immortality curse technique forced her body to evolve. Over the next decade, she then transformed into more of a cursed spirit than a human, and as a curse, she feared that she had the potential to end humanity. To avoid this happening, she used an unknown barrier technique to preserve her mind, meaning that she never lost control of herself and therefore wasn't a threat. In the end, Tengen's best attributes were her advanced techniques, her cursed energy reserves, and her cursed energy output, since she was constantly reinforcing her own gigantic barriers. Now, in 9th place we have the Smallpox Deity, aka the Smallpox Hag, and this is a special grade curse that Kenjaku used against Mei. Fun fact, Gege specifically wanted this to be a disease-related curse, but he also didn't want to offend anyone who might be sick. That's why he chose to name it smallpox, because although that disease wiped out 500 million people, there isn't anyone alive today who's currently infected. Anyhow, given that smallpox was often fatal, the curse's domain expansion takes the form of a graveyard. Inside this space, the domain automatically targets whoever has the most cursed energy, leading to a couple of downsides. Firstly, unlike the best domains in the series, the smallpox's guaranteed hit can only target one person at a time. This is a pretty glaring weakness, because by only focusing on one target, it means other people inside the domain have the freedom to attack the cursed spirit. Secondly, due to the target being chosen automatically, it means that someone can avoid the domain's effect by suppressing their cursed energy, since the target will switch to someone else. These weaknesses are exactly why the Smallpox Deity lost, but despite that, its domain can still be dangerous. The way it works is that the person with the most cursed energy gets trapped inside a coffin, which is then smashed into the ground by a giant gravestone. The gravestone itself deals a lot of damage even for a grade 1 sorcerer, and once the coffin is in the ground, the victim then has 3 seconds to escape. If they don't break out within 3 seconds, then they'll automatically die from smallpox, but even if they do break out, they can instantly be trapped inside the coffin again. Therefore, inside this domain, it's not even the smallpox that might kill you. Instead, a sorcerer might just get worn down from an endless cycle of getting crushed, breaking out, and then immediately getting crushed again. Moving on, the next curse on this list doesn't have a domain, but he makes up for it with his curse technique and his pure viciousness. The character I'm talking about is Kurourushi, who was born due to mankind's fear of roaches. This fear was enough to make Kurourushi a special grade, and when the Culling Games began, he quickly became one of the highest scoring players. Having said that, after about 12 days, he found himself locked in a standoff with Druve, Ryu, and Uro. Given that all of them are either special grade or close to it, everyone here was hesitant to make the first move. For that reason, Kurourushi just went to sleep, and he only emerged from his hibernation once Druve had been killed by Yuta. Following that, we got to see his curse technique, which has 4 main benefits. Benefit number 1 is that he can summon an army of real-life cockroaches, with each roach being strengthened by his own curse energy. As the king of roaches, Kurourushi has total control over them and uses his form to attack sorcerers and eat humans. This person specifically got turned into a skeleton after the roaches devoured all of his meat within seconds. Even Yuta described this form as posing a serious threat, although as a special grade he was able to destroy them with his cursed energy output. Regardless, Kurourushi was still a threat, as his technique granted him these insect shikigami. As you can see, these shikigami have an interesting looking sack, and when Yuta sliced them, the liquid from this sack blinded him for a split second. This gave Kurourushi a direct opening to attack Yuta with his festering life sword. This sword is apparently something he naturally has, and inside of these holes are 6 eggs. At close range, the sword can fire off these eggs directly into someone's body, and they were strong enough to bypass Yuta's curse energy reinforcement. Once the eggs were inside his flesh, they then hatched into these giant cockroaches that burst out his skin. Naturally, that forced Yuta to divert his attention as he wanted to get rid of them, and while he was distracted, Kurourushi delivered a nearly fatal strike right to his stomach. If Yuta didn't have reverse curse technique, then he would have died right in this moment, but thankfully he was able to heal himself and kill Kurourushi at the same time. Remember, every cursed spirit is made from negative curse energy, meaning that they can all be killed by the positive energy of reverse curse technique. In fact, one of the biggest misconceptions is that curses can heal themselves with reverse curse technique. It's just not true. Curses just heal themselves using negative curse energy, whereas humans specifically have to do it with positive energy. That's why when Yuta finally outputted reverse curse technique, it exploded Kurourushi into a million pieces. What's interesting though is that when Kurourushi died, all of his curse energy was transferred to his son. For a bit of context here, in real life there are cockroaches who can reproduce without needing to have a partner. This reproduction process is known as parthenogenesis, I think I said that right, and Kurourushi did this before he went into hibernation. When Yuta then killed the parent, it was the child who inherited all of Kuroroshi's curse energy, presumably making him just as strong. In the end though, it was Ryu who hit the curse with a blast that did this to it, and shortly afterwards Yuta finished it off. Now, the next 2 places on this list belong to a couple of disaster curses who were the only spirits smart enough to strategize together. Out of this group, there was one member who was almost never sent to the front lines, and that was Dagon. While his comrades were busy getting their butts kicked by Gojo, Sukuna, and then Gojo again and again, Dagon stayed away from the fighting that entire time. My guess is that that's because Dagon was a cursed womb, which is essentially a baby curse that isn't fully developed. As a result, Dagon had no real combat experience, and he got cooked when he tried to fight Naobito Zenin. This beatdown is what contributed to Dagon evolving to his true form, and in that new form, Nanami described him as having endless HP. Remember how we mentioned that curses only heal themselves with cursed energy? Well, according to the guidebook, Dagon gains cursed energy for every human that he eats. During the Shibuya incident, he ate probably 100 people when he was a cursed womb, so from Nanami's point of view, it seemed like he could keep regenerating no matter what happened. Of course, that turned out not to be true, but the fact that Nanami even thought that shows that Dagon's reserves must be pretty big. With his technique, the curse can produce enormous waves of water, but even in his evolved state, Naobito was still comfortably winning. The one thing that was in Dagon's favor is that he had a domain expansion, and interestingly, he even had this domain when he was a cursed womb. Inside this space, Dagon has an infinite supply of shikigami, ranging from piranhas to giant eels to whatever this is, and he's able to overwhelm his victims with the sheer numbers. By contrast, Hanami is another disaster curse, and her domain is one we never actually saw in the anime. Luckily though, we actually do know what it can do, but first we should probably explain her technique, since it has a lot of different functions. To start things off, Hanami can use curse energy to generate her own plant life, which includes giant roots that can be manipulated at will, wooden balls that stab her opponents, and even flowers that have an effect on Gojo. These flowers briefly reduce a person's will to fight, giving Hanami an opening to either attack or run away. Also, similar to Kurourushi, the Disaster Curse has the ability to grow things inside the bodies of other people. In Season 1, when facing off against Jujutsu High, Hanami released these buds that went inside of Fushiguro. The more he used his technique, the deeper the roots would grow, so it put the sorcerer in a position where he had to stop using Jujutsu in order to save his own life. On top of that, in the same way that Dagon absorbs curse energy by eating humans, Hanami absorbs real plant life and trees and then converts their life energy into cursed energy. Unlike Dagon though, Hanami doesn't get to keep this cursed energy for herself. Instead, all of it goes into the flower on her left arm, which, according to Todo, it would release an incredible blast of cursed energy. This is what brings us back to the topic of Hanami's domain, because in the mobile game Phantom Parade, it was shown that this cursed energy blast is the effect of Hanami's domain expansion. In terms of just raw power, it's probably stronger than any one attack that Dagon has shown, but in terms of usefulness, I think Dagon's domain is still better, because, the variety of the different Shikigami is just ridiculous. Outside of their domains though, Hanami is the better fighter, because people often forget Kenjaku warned her not to kill anyone when she was at Jujutsu High. This restriction definitely had an effect on the way the fight was going, at least in the beginning, as she ended up tanking 5 black flashes from Yuji. In the words of Gege, the beatdown that Hanami received would have instantly killed Jogo, so this shows us that she is the most durable Disaster Curse. When we also factor in that Hanami has more advanced techniques besides just domain expansion, I feel like overall, Dagon belongs in 7th place with Hanami just ahead. Now, ranked above them is the only cursed spirit on this list to be based off a real-life deity. In Hinduism, Ganesha is one of the most well-known and most worshipped gods, and even if you're not a Hindu, you've probably seen references to him either in the real world or on TV. Known as the remover of obstacles, Hindus will often pray to Ganesha before major life events, as it's believed that he'll get rid of anything that might prevent success. In the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, the cursed spirit Ganesha is confirmed not to be from Japan, and it almost certainly came from India where there are over 1 billion Hindus. Once again, this confirms that cursed energy is not only limited to Japan, it's just that Tengen's pure barrier optimizes cursed energy, making it more likely for sorcerers to appear. Outside of Japan though, non-sorcerers can still produce cursed energy at the moment of death, which is probably how Ganesha was created. This curse was easily one of Kenjaku's favourite since he chose to keep it with him at all times, rather than entering it into the Culling Games like he did with Kurourushi. In chapter 201, he displayed Ganesha's full power in a test against the American military. During this test, Kenjaku was placed on one side of the White House, and his mission was to get past 45 soldiers by himself in order to reach the other side. Because all of these soldiers were technically in his way, he used Ganesha's power to remove these obstacles. In the blink of an eye, every single soldier was then teleported out the White House and into the sky, as the spirit cleared the path for Kenjaku to walk through. Later on, he described Ganesha as a curse that uses concepts against his targets, which is a fancy way of saying hacks. When it comes to abilities like this, they have the potential to bypass things like someone's durability or someone's strength. They just kind of ignore the set rules of the universe and can kind of like move things out the way regardless of how powerful they might be. In fact, Kenjaku was so confident in Ganesha's abilities that it was the first curse he used in the fight against Yuki Tsukumo. Of course, being a special grade sorcerer, she finished him in one smack, but in Ganesha's defense, this was directly to his head, and I think in this scenario there's only one curse that might have survived, and that's Rika. Anyway, earlier we mentioned how Dagon was getting outclassed by Naobito Zenin, and the next curse on this list is his son Naoya. Just like his dad, Naoya had projection sorcery and was set to be the leader of the Zenin clan following his dad's death. However, in Naobito's will, there was a clause stating that if Gojo wasn't around, then Megumi should be the next leader. This decision led to a series of events in which Naoya and his uncles actively tried to kill Fushiguro along with his allies. The end result was Maki getting revenge for Mai's death by wiping out the whole Zenin clan, and during this massacre, Naoya was finished off with a regular kitchen knife. In chapter 33, we learned that if a sorcerer is killed without Jujutsu, then they might turn into a cursed spirit after their death, and in this case that's exactly what happened. What's amazing about Naoya is that as a cursed spirit, he still maintained all of his human intelligence, and he achieved the maximum potential of his technique. In particular, his new body was custom made to travel faster than the speed of sound, although it did require a little bit of a charging up period. When he then moved at Mark 3, it shattered all the glass in the vicinity without him even touching it, which, in terms of raw speed, is one of the most impressive things we've ever seen. According to Noritoshi though, Nao's durability is nothing compared to Hanami, and during the Culling Games he got sliced up multiple times. To be specific, he actually got sliced in half, but what I thought was interesting is that he regenerated from this within seconds, and to put this in perspective, can we imagine anyone else on this list really getting sliced in half and then completely regenerating almost immediately? It's not something that curses do that often, so his healing speed is pretty amazing. His most impressive feat though is his domain expansion, as it is genuinely one of the best in the entire series. Usually, when someone is touched by projection sorcery, they then have to imagine themselves making 24 unique movements in a single second. If they don't do this in time, then their whole body gets frozen, but inside of this domain, things get taken to a completely different level. Instead of freezing someone's entire body, the domain freezes individual cells, meaning that if you were to move forward, certain things inside you would stay in place, while the rest of you moves forward. Essentially, the more you try to move around, the more he rips you apart from the inside, and although these two luckily didn't die, if they'd been here any longer, it would have been a pretty agonizing death. Switching over to third place, we have Rika, and specifically we're talking about Vengeful Curse Rika, and not the Shikigami Rika who can use Reverse Curse technique. Described as the Queen of Curses, Rika was so overwhelmingly powerful that Geto thought having her would make him as strong as Gojo. In JJK Volume 0, Satoru himself wasn't even sure that he could beat her, saying that if she went out of control, he'd risk his life to stop it. Not that he would stop it, but that he'd risk his life. Considering who Gojo is, this is a massive deal, and it shows Rika's raw power is unmatched by any curse. In particular, she has by far the highest curse energy reserves of anyone in this video, she has the most physical strength, the highest durability, the highest output, and arguably the most destructive potential. Narratively, she's also referred to as the Queen of Curses, implying that Gege believes she should be number one. Her weakness, however, is that she has low levels of intelligence and no domain expansion, so although she has all the power in the world, we don't know how she would deal with being trapped in someone's domain. My guess is that sort of like how Gojo survived Malevolent Shrine, I think that Rika would be able to tank the shorthand effect of domains like Hanami's, for example, domains that rely on raw power. But I think when it comes to the conceptual domains, things that don't directly attack you with raw power, I think it's hard to say that Rika would survive that unscathed. In any case, Vengeful Curse Rika has the most raw strength of anyone, but because of her lack of skill in terms of advanced techniques, that is why for this video she's in third place. This is what brings us to the top two curses, who excel at nearly all of the criteria that we use for this ranking. In order to rank them fairly, we're going to go through each factor one by one, beginning with advanced techniques. In Jogo's case, he has a couple of advanced techniques that Mahito doesn't, for example his domain amplification that chipped away at Gojo's infinity, not to mention he's also the only curse to show off his maximum technique. On the other hand, Mahito is the only curse to utilize Black Flash, and arguably his biggest talent was the power to rapidly learn new things. The best example of this is his 0.2 second domain expansion, which he recreated after seeing it done by Gojo himself. Additionally, while we haven't seen his maximum technique, we have seen him use extremely complex jujutsu, like when he fused together the souls of multiple different people to create an entirely new being. The reality is that both curses are extremely talented in this area, and I think Jogo has the edge when it comes to the quantity of advanced techniques, like he does have one more advanced technique than Mahito does, but I think Mahito is better when it comes to quality, like his domain effect is better, he can activate it way faster, and also he was more confident with it, because Mahito was confident enough to use his domain in Sukuna's presence, whereas Jogo was too afraid to try. Moving on to Battle IQ, this one was way easier to decide, with Mahito winning by a comfortable margin. Throughout the series, he pretty much made it his full-time job to think of new convoluted ways to trick his opponents, and as we know, Mekamaru, Nobara, and Yuji, they were all victims of this. At some point or another, he out-strategized all of them, and in the process mastered the different aspects of his technique. Speaking of technique, I think it's pretty clear that Jogo CT gives him way more destructive potential, whereas Idol Transfiguration gives Mahito way more applications. Don't get me wrong, Jogo's curse technique can do a lot, like with the insects and with the pillars of fire and all the other things, but overall, Mahito's technique can just do more. To name just a few of the uses, Mahito can repair damage that even Reverse Curse technique can't fix. He can freely manipulate the shape of his own body and soul, duplicate himself, turn civilians into sorcerers, and is pretty much unkillable unless you can specifically attack his soul, which, as we know, most people can't do. However, all of this does require curse energy, and for a special grade, Mahito's reserves aren't that special. Against Yuji and Nanami, he barely had any left after using his domain, and ended up having to use the little bit he had to try and escape. Against Mekamaru, he said that 10 days was enough to get back to full strength, implying that his recovery time would at least be a matter of days and not a matter of hours. On top of that, during his final fight in Shibuya, he then completely ran out, and without his curse technique, he had nothing. This is why Jogo gets the points when it comes to reserves and output, as he was able to perform city level feats without his curse energy ever running low. In terms of durability, this one is a little bit tricky because when Mahito is in his true form, he's said to be 200% tougher than normal. In this state, he reached Hanami levels of durability, and he even kind of looks like Hanami, and Gege confirmed that Black Flash was the only way for Yuji to defeat him. On average though, Jogo's base form is clearly more durable than Mahito's base form, since he was able to tank a direct red from Gojo at close range. Therefore, the winner of this category purely depends on whether you value someone's true form or their base form, which one matters more. Because, if Mahito didn't die, then clearly this true form is something he would have a lot more often. Whereas, up until this point, Jogo was clearly more durable. So yeah, it purely depends on what you value more. So far, we have mainly been talking about characters when they're at their peak, which I guess works in Mahito's favor, but at the same time, I just think it's fairer to call this one a tie, since although Mahito might be tougher, he didn't get to use this form as much as we would have liked. So you let me know in the comments who you think deserves this point, but yeah, I'm just going to call it a draw. The next category is hacks, which Google defines as overpowered abilities or advantages that break the rules of a fictional universe. Although Jogo's technique is strong, there's no real hacks involved there. No, real hacks is Mahito being unaffected by attacks that don't directly target his soul. The only exception that really matters are attacks like Hollow Purple or Rika's Curse Energy Blast, aka things that can destroy his entire body and soul in one hit, without the chance of regeneration. These kind of moves are pretty much exclusive to special grade sorcerers though, so against a grade 1 like Todo or Nanami, Mahito never would have been killed by them in a one-on-one. For intelligence, this category is close, because outside of their battle IQ that we talked about earlier, there's no massive difference. If I had to make the argument, I'd say that by the end, Jogo had more emotional intelligence, and he preferred to stick to the plan, whereas Mahito was more likely to be driven by his instincts. On the flip side, you could also say that Mahito was more intellectually curious, and was constantly running experiments to deepen his understanding of the soul. On top of that, he read books in his spare time, including poetry and human myths, which for a cursed spirit is highly unusual behavior. Therefore, I think the narrative was trying to show us that he is more intelligent, especially considering he's the youngest of the disaster curses. That said, Jogo wins when it comes to physical strength and speed, with Dagon explicitly saying that he's the fastest in the group. As a consequence, going into the final category, the score is equal with them both having 5 points each, with the last criteria being viciousness. Because curses are made from negative emotions, they normally act in ways that we believe is evil, and both Jogo and Mahito, they've shown a total disregard for human life. Neither of them ever cared about how many people they killed, but what makes someone truly vicious is when they're deliberately cruel for no apparent reason. Examples include what Jogo did to the people of this restaurant, and what Mahito did to Junpei, those guys in the cinema, these random civilians, and all the people he turned into transfigured humans. If we compare the numbers, Mahito just generally caused a lot more suffering just because he could, and he fully embraced his nature as a curse. Jogo, on the other hand, was more focused on the bigger picture, and he didn't quite get the same level of enjoyment from being cruel. That's why Mahito is undeniably more vicious, making him the #1 curse on this list. If you enjoyed this ranking, then I'd appreciate if you dropped a like, as I'm hoping we can hit 4,000, and also don't forget to sub, as my next video is one that might surprise you. Also, on screen now are my previous 2 videos, which I made ranking every ancient sorcerer and every potential future special grade, so if that sounds interesting, then be sure to click the links on screen. Thank you for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.